The Mount of Olives is a mountain that is sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. For Jews, it is the home to the oldest Jewish graveyard in the world, with some of the most famous rabbis and Jewish leaders being buried here. It is thought to be the place where the resurrection will begin. It is mentioned many times in the Tanakh, or Jewish Bible. It is also sacred to Christians. It is the mountain where Jesus spent his final Holy Week with his disciples, walking back and forth to the Temple Mount. It is the place where Jesus ascends to the heavens. It is also sacred to Muslims as the place where the Kaaba, the black stone in Mecca, will return in order to unite with the Dome of the Rock from where the world was created. Join Rabbi Moshe for this short tour to give you a taste of the Mount of Olives, which hopefully will inspire you to visit Israel and experience the land of the Tanakh, the Bible, firsthand.
Hey everyone, this is Rabbi Moshe from the Israel Alliance. Welcome to our tour of the Mount of Olives. We are now on the top of the Mount of Olives. We are less than a mile, about 1 kilometer away from where the first temple stood, where the second temple stood. That's how close we are. It's amazing. And I want to just share a story with you. On this ridge, nearly 2,000 years ago, a group of some of the greatest sages of the Jewish people were up here, and they were crying desperately. Why? Because below us, or on the other side of this valley, they were looking at Jerusalem, looking at the temple in ruins just after the Romans had destroyed it. And it was on fire, and there were foxes running through the Holy of Holies, and the rabbis were crying. Except for one of them, that is. Rabbi Akiva was laughing. And the rabbis who were crying look at Rabbi Akiva, and they say to him, Akiva, why are you laughing at a time like this? And he says, well, why are you crying? And they say, what do you mean, why are we crying? Of course, the temple's in ruins, Jerusalem's destroyed. How can you not cry? And so this is what Rabbi Akiva answers them. Looking down, he says, you're right. I see the destruction. And you know what? The prophets, Jeremiah, predicted the destruction of Jerusalem, of the city, of the temple. And I see that their words were borne out. Their words were true. However, the book of Zechariah, as we say in Hebrew, the Navi, the prophet Zechariah prophesied that one day there would be elderly people sitting on the streets of Jerusalem with their canes in their hands, because they have not been exiled. And there will be boys and girls playing on the streets again one day. The temple would be rebuilt. Israel would be restored. And he says, if one prophecy is true, if the prophecy of the destruction is true, then the prophecy of the rebuilding must also be true. You can't have it that one's true and one's not true. So therefore, says Akiva, in the destruction, I see ultimately the return and the rebuilding of Jerusalem. So the other rabbis who were crying look over at Rabbi Akiva and they say to him, Akiva, you have brought us comfort. Akiva, you have brought us comfort. So here we are, standing on the top of the Mount of Olives. In Hebrew, it's called Har HaZeitim. It was called that, obviously, because this mountain was filled with olive trees. As I'll mention a little bit later in the tour, that these olive trees were essential for use in the temple because the olives were taken, crushed, turned into olive oil, and used for various things in the temple. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what we're looking at here. So we are at where we are standing now is actually not part of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. The border of the city was, if you could see below here, where there's trees and there's actually a road. I don't know if you can see the cars down there. This is called the Kidron Valley. The Kidron Valley is mentioned in the Tanakh, or the Hebrew Bible. It's also mentioned in the Christian Bible. The Kidron Valley served as the border between what was Jerusalem, which was on the other side of the wall there, and what was outside of Jerusalem. So this area where we are standing 2,000 years ago, we would not be in Jerusalem, but would be looking at Jerusalem. So the Kidron Valley was a natural geographic barrier that demarcated where Jerusalem ended. Now, starting where the Gold Dome is the place where the temple stood, the temple that Solomon built. He built the first temple. The second temple, built by Zerubbabel, stood there as well. Going back even further, the Bible tells us that God instructs Abraham to bring his son Isaac as an offering to the land of Moriah, to the mountain of Moriah, and that we believe that is the traditional place where Abraham brought Isaac. That is the place, even going back further, we have a tradition that when God created the world, he began from that spot right there. Although the world, of course, is a circle, but we say it's the center of the world. Maybe not in a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense, it's the center of the world. It's the place in Christian tradition where Jesus traveled his last week on earth from here, from the Mount of Olives, to the Temple Mount, where he knocked over the tables of the money changers, going back and forth in the final week between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount. So again, looking at the horizon here, you see the Temple Mount, the Gold Dome. To the left of it, you see a gray dome. That's called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And below that, I hope you can see a set of stairs, guys. Those are the original stairs from the Second Temple period, where most of the pilgrims would enter into the temple on those stairs. We call them the Southern Stairs. And I want to share another story here with you about those stairs. Neil Armstrong, who of course is famous for being the first person to walk on the moon, was here in Israel on a tour, and his guide took him to those stairs that we're looking at. And while he was standing there, and Neil Armstrong, remember, is a Christian, he looks at the guide and he says, "1 second, are you telling me that those stairs are the same stairs that Jesus would have walked on?" And so the guide says to Neil Armstrong, he says, "Yes, I'm 100% sure." So Neil Armstrong says to the guide, he says, "I want you to know something. These steps are more important to me than the steps that I took on the moon." And for both Jews and Christians, I think we can relate to that story, because so much of our history goes back here. So much of the Bible comes right back here, and they call this the Holy Basin. So those are the stairs led to the Second Temple. And if we continue, which would be to the south, across the road, you can see like a little slope there. That area is where King David made his capital. That's the original site where Jerusalem begins, where David takes the hill from the Jebusites, and he makes that into his capital, the city of David, and that's the original Jerusalem where it begins. And it expands that way, north and west, but that's where it begins. Okay? And so that's Ir David, or the city of David. Now, if you look up out onto the hill there, we're now outside the walls, up all the way up on the hill. That's what's called Mount Zion. Originally, that was included in the walls of Jerusalem. It's a good time for me to tell you here that the walls you see here, right, the walls you see are only, and I say only because in Israel, something that's 500 years old, no one really pays attention to that much. It's got to be at least 1,000 years old. But these walls were built about 500 years ago by Solomon the Great at the beginning of the Ottoman Empire. And remember, it's not that Jerusalem didn't have walls. Jerusalem always had walls going back to King David, but the walls kept getting knocked down and rebuilt. But these are the latest walls rebuilt. But the original walls of Jerusalem, of course, are under that. And if we turn this way, when we look towards the north, it's quite in the distance, but there's a hill out in the distance there, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's actually a structure there, and it's called Nebi Samuel, which means the prophet Samuel. And it's a tradition that is the grave of Samuel the prophet. And turning more this way, you can see an Israeli flag, and that is a Jewish neighborhood called Ma'ale Zaitim. And I will talk to you a little bit more about that a little bit later. Now, where I'm standing is an outlook called the Rehab observation point. Rehab, it's named for the minister of tourism. His name was Rehab Zevi, and he was sadly assassinated in 2001. So they named this viewpoint for him. Okay, now just if you could pan the camera that way, and if you see the hills, that is the south. And the Bible tells us that when Abraham is coming with his son Isaac, it said he saw the place from afar. That's what the Bible says in the book of Genesis. And those hills are the first hills, if you're coming from the south, where Abraham and Isaac were coming from, that you could actually see Mount Moriah. And we believe that Abraham and Isaac were standing atop those hills when the Bible testifies that they saw the place from afar. So let's continue our tour. Let me come over here, grab my bag, and we're gonna really have a good time today. There's a lot of things to see. One more thing as we're walking, take a look down the hill. You see those gold onion type domes. It's a very distinguished feature of the mountain. That's the Russian Church of Mary Magdalene. That's towards the bottom of the Mount of Olives, but we're gonna make our way down there. But come with me, follow me, and I wanna just tell you one more thing on our tour here. Take a look up there. You see those arches? There's a hotel there. It's called the Seven Arch Hotel. There, you can only see 3 from where we are, but you have to take my word for it. There are 7 of them. Interesting. Until 1967, where we are standing, this area was occupied by the Jordanians. Right? This is what we call East Jerusalem. And the king of Jordan, his name was King Hussein. On that spot there, he started to build a palace, and he had full intention to have a palace there so you could have this wonderful view. And the Six-Day War broke out June 5th, 1967, and in 6 short days, Israel, one of the things we did on June 7th is we unified Jerusalem as the eternal capital of the Jewish people. So he didn't get to move into his palace. So they took the palace and they turned it into a hotel, and that building is now called the Seven Arch Hotel. So we have King Hussein to thank for laying the foundation, but we have the soldiers of the Six-Day War to thank for the rest of the hotel. Let's go. Okay, in front of me, where you see that large Israeli flag, is a compound, an area where you have some Jewish families living. I think about 100 families, and you don't have a lot of Jews living on this side of the city. And what you have here on the Mount of Olives, though, is that you got to remember that Jewish history goes back all the way to the time of King David. The very first mention of the Mount of Olives in the Bible goes all the way back. Remember to the book of Samuel 2, where it says that King David is fleeing from his son Absalom. Absalom is trying to take over the kingdom, and David flees. And how does he flee? So the Bible tells us that he crosses the Kidron Valley, which we mentioned before, and he comes from the Kidron Valley up over Malei Zaitim, or the heights of the Mount of Olives. And so this, though it's in the Bible, and there's a Jewish graveyard here, which we didn't even talk about yet, going back a couple thousand years, still, there were never a lot of Jews living here because the city was divided until 67. So here you have pockets of Jews that live up here on the Mount of Olives. Now, it's not a simple thing to live here, but they are very hardy, and they don't believe for one second, and we are not occupying East Jerusalem. We are returning. We're not settlers. We are resettling the land. And so here, that's what you see in front of you. Okay, let's go back here to the steps, and we're going to go down the Mount of Olives. Okay, we're going to start heading down the Mount of Olives, and believe me, it's a lot easier going down than it is coming up. And to your left over here, if you see this entranceway, there's a sign there that tells us that it's the tomb of the prophets Malachi and Haggai, or Malachi and Haggai. Now, the inside there, where we're not going to go, but if you see up here, it says in Hebrew, Kidron Valley, Haggai, Malachi. We're not going to go in there, but there are what's called, the archaeological word is kochim, which are these graves that are kind of dug into the mountain. But the archaeologists tell us that they actually date back to the Byzantine period, which makes it impossible that those were the graves of those prophets, but at least we appreciate the sentiment. So let's continue going down, and we got to be very careful here because it is quite a steep hill. I hope to see you here one day in person, and we'll get to walk this together, and you'll appreciate how steep it is. November 29th, 1947, the United Nations voted to partition what was called Palestine. That means to divide the land into an Arab state and a Jewish state. The Arabs did not accept that, and we ended up going to war. The War of Independence will begin 6 months later when the state is declared in May, but between November 29th and that May of 1948, there will be fighting going on between the local Jews and the local Arabs. Now, part of that fighting took place in areas where there were Jews and Arabs living together. One of those places was right here in Jerusalem, of course, in the Old City. And the Old City of Jerusalem, there was a lot of fighting going on, but when the war begins, the Jordanian Legion, after the state is declared, remember May 14th, the Jordanian Legion tries to take over the Jewish quarter of the Old City. And after a few weeks of fighting, sadly, the Jewish quarter falls in 1948. And it's not until 1967, the Six-Day War, that Jews will return to the Old City and unify Jerusalem. So like I said before, where we are standing, this is an area that was occupied by Jordan from 1948 to 1967. Now, during the War of Independence, of course, many lives were lost. 6,000 lives were lost. And in the Old City, quite a few people were killed. What did they do with the bodies when they were killed? So they buried them in the Old City. And until 1967, those bodies remained there buried in the Old City. After 1967, the bodies were moved to where we are standing now. And right next to me, this is what's called in Hebrew a kever achim, or a communal grave. And what you see here is a grave with all the people that fell in the fighting for the Old City. They are buried here. Now, it's not how you sort of think about an army. You think about an army, young soldiers fighting. People were desperate. Everybody had to serve. Everybody had to pick up a weapon and fight whoever was able-bodied. And if you look at some of the names and the people here, right? You look at the ages. It's so varied. But I want you to take a look. This says in Hebrew, it says Nisim Gini. Nisim Gini, look how old he was when he got killed. He was only 10 years old. The youngest fighter in the Israel Defense Forces in the history of the state. And he fell when he was 10. You see here the symbol of the Israel Defense Forces. And he actually participated. His job was to run between positions and to give information to some. He didn't. I don't think he was holding a weapon, but his job was to run between positions. And he got shot running between positions, and he died sadly a very painful death. But he never called out. He never yelled out in order not to give away the position of where the other fighters were. So they were moved here to the Har HaZeitim, the Mount of Olives. It's a good time to mention that this is the oldest Jewish cemetery in the world. There are maybe about 180,000 plus Jewish graves here on the Mount of Olives. And The reason why so many Jews wanted to be buried here, because we have in our tradition that this is the place that the resurrection will take place. We know that the prophets tell us that when the Messiah arrives, the Mount of Olives will be split in two. This is a very significant mountain based on the Bible. And so here, people always wanted to be buried here throughout the generations in order to be the first to be part of the resurrection in the end of days. And so we'll talk more about that a little bit later. So, okay, let's make our way down the mountain. Continue down over here. That's just where you were. And hey, take a look over the fence. You can see, I forgot to mention this to you, right next to the communal grave, they made this beautiful wall to look like the western wall, to look like the what's called in Hebrew the kotel, the western wall of the temple. And it's a beautiful memorial as the people who were killed in the old city, to bury them next to this wall that's meant to look like the western wall. Beautiful. So let's continue walking down the very steep Mount of Olives, and you're going to see on your right and on your left, you can peek through here, you can see all the Jewish graves, many of the Jewish graves, but we'll talk in just a sec. Okay, we are standing amongst the many graves here on the Mount of Olives. Like I said, 180,000 plus. And it's really, it's like a who's who of Jewish history here. The graves, in burial in Jewish custom, we do it as quickly as possible. When someone passes away, we try to bury them before the day ends. The body should return to dust, to the earth. And right next to me here is the grave of a very famous rabbi, Rabbi Abraham Isaac HaKohen Cook. Who was he? He was the first chief rabbi of, it was actually Palestine, it wasn't even Israel yet, very, very influential, very famous rabbi here in the land of Israel, known for his incredible love of the land, love of people, and to this very day has an enormous influence. And I just want to point out one thing to you, and it's okay if you don't read Hebrew because I'm going to translate for you, but it says on his grave, 3 times it uses the same word. It says Allah le'eretz hakodesh. He moved to the land of Israel. But Allah doesn't just mean move. Allah means he went up, right? Whenever you go up to the land of Israel, you're going up in spirituality, up in holiness. Okay, and then it says Allah Yerushalayma. He went up to Jerusalem. Okay, that's the second aliyah, the second time he went up. And then for the third one, it says Allah Hashamayma. He went up to the heavens. And that was his final aliyah. And beautiful, beautiful language here. And so I'd urge you to go Google him, Rav Kook, K-O-O-K, Abraham Isaac Cook, and read some of the stories about him. And so this is, like I said, the most famous Jewish cemetery in the world, the oldest Jewish cemetery. And sadly, though, a lot of the graves were desecrated between 1948 and 1967 when Jordan controlled here. Now, you'll notice on the graves, you look around, you don't see flowers. What do you see? Stones. Where does this custom come from? So there's a bunch of reasons. Okay, one of the reasons that when you put a flower, what happens? Flowers dry up, they wither, they die, and they're gone very quickly. There's nothing permanent on this earth, but rocks are certainly more permanent, and it's a reminder that the person lives on in this world, that we are still connected to them in a more permanent fashion. The other idea is that the Hebrew word for rock, even, Aleph, Bet, Nun, is an acronym. It stands for Av, Ben, Neched, okay, which means father, son, grandson, or it could be Aim, Bat, Nechta, mother, daughter, granddaughter. And so the stone represents the generations because that's what it stands for. So you will see this all over the world in Jewish cemeteries, stones as a reminder of the person's life. Okay? Let's make our way out of the cemetery and start heading further down the Mount of Olives. Let's go. Here visiting graves. Behind me there's someone, in front of us there are people there. You see, we'll get a little closer, and there's a custom to come on what's called the yurtzeit. The yurtzeit is the annual anniversary of the death, where people will come visit the grave of a loved one on the anniversary of their death, but some people will come all year round, not only then. This is, by the way, still an active cemetery. You can be buried here still. We're continuing down. Look at all the graves. It's incredible how many there are here. And like I said, if you want to be buried here, you can. I think it costs about $20,000 though to be buried here, but it's still active. And a lot of people want to pay the money. They want to do it. I mean, look at that amazing view here. You see? Let's continue our tour here on the Mount of Olives. And as we came down maybe a third of the mountain so far, and we're stopping in this place. Again, like I said at the beginning of the tour, this mountain has great significance both for Jews and for Christians, and of course for Muslims, but I'm not going to really talk too much about that or else the tour would be too long, mostly just about Jews and Christians. So this spot here where I stopped, behind me, I'll show you in a second, is a church called Dominus Flevit. I'm going to tell you what this place means for Christians, but let me first tell you what it means for Jews where we're standing. Behind me, as you can see in the foreground, of course, is that gold dome of the what's called the Dome of the Rock. It is not a mosque. People think it's a mosque. It's really just a monumental building where pilgrims would come to visit, built in the 7th century. But this mosque, that building, the Dome of the Rock, our tradition tells us that is where the temple stood. The temple, both the first temple and the second temple, stood there with the Holy of Holies, the holiest spot in the world, covered now where that gold dome is. So here was one of the few activities while the temple was standing that took place outside the temple that was related to the temple. What am I talking about? The book of Numbers tells us about a special ritual called the Para Aduma, or the red heifer. The red heifer was used when someone became ritually impure, and I'm not going to get into all the details, it's complicated. Someone becomes ritually impure because they came in contact with a dead body. And so they had to go through this ceremony. It's a very complicated ceremony, but it involved using the ashes of a red heifer, a red cow. Now, it was not done in the temple. It was done, we believe, probably right here, because it had to be done eye level so that you could see the temple, but not in the temple. Now we are east of the Temple Mount, and we are eye level, and so this spot is the best candidate. So most people believe that this is where the ceremony of the Para Aduma, or the red heifer, took place, right here. So for Jews, this is a very important, a very significant spot. I might add in here, very interesting. Right now, nowadays, there are people traveling the world to find a red heifer, a red cow, and hopefully, we'll rebuild the third temple, and so they got to be ready. Okay, so that's this spot for Jews, and I mentioned is a church here called Dominus Flevit. Now, it's again, Catholic, it's Franciscan, but the spot here, in Christian tradition, this is the place where Jesus looked at Jerusalem and he weeps over the city for its impending destruction. And the words Dominus Flevit means our Lord wept. And the church behind us is shaped like a teardrop, and it's built by an Italian architect called Antonio Barlucci, who we'll see in a few minutes at the Church of Gethsemane. He designed that one as well. Now, very interesting, it's one of 3 churches in the Holy Land in Israel that does not face the rising sun. It faces the Temple Mount. Why? Again, because this is a spot, like I said, in Christian tradition where Jesus looked over at the temple and wept over its impending destruction, and so therefore it made sense to build a church facing the temple. If you know the other 2, let us know. Send me an email or put it in the comments. Let's see if you guys know. So that's it for this spot. We're gonna continue. We're gonna move down that way, and let's go. Okay, we're gonna continue our tour walking down this way. You can see behind me, the hill of where the old city is up there on top, but we're going down. We're at the bottom now at the Mount of Olives, and you see the exit sign here. We're gonna actually enter through the exit into the famous Church of Gethsemane, which is actually, there's a very significant place there both for Jews and Christians. So let's go in there now. So here we are in what's called the Garden of Gethsemane. First of all, where does the name Gethsemane come from? Gethsemane is actually a translation, or I should say a perversion of the Hebrew. The Hebrew is actually Gat Shemen. Gat Shemen means an olive press. It was a place in the Second Temple period. This mountain was filled with olive trees, and they came here to get the choicest olives to make oil for use in the temple. Remember, just behind me is the Temple Mount. So this area here was filled with olive trees. I know sometimes people picture a garden in America, at least when you say the word garden, you think of colorful flowers and rolling grass and things like that. But here in the Middle East, and in particular in Israel, when we talk of a garden, we don't necessarily mean the exact same thing as you might be imagining. I know I bring a lot of people here and they say this is the Garden of Gethsemane, and they're a bit surprised. So you see all these trees here. Now these trees are quite old. Some of these trees go back close to 2,000 years. And so for our Christian audience, this is a very significant place, because here in the Garden of Gethsemane in Christian tradition is where Jesus comes to pray on his before he's arrested here by the Romans, and he's betrayed here. So it's a very significant place. So if these olive trees are, say, 2,000 years old, these are the same olive trees that would have been here when in Christian tradition, when Jesus was here. So this is a place where we see again a convergence. In Jewish tradition, this is a place where the olives were used and the olives were pressed, the oil was used for the temple. In Christian tradition, this is a place where Jesus is betrayed and Jesus prays here on his last days. So again, very, very important mountain, Mount of Olives, both to our tradition, the Jewish tradition, and also in Christian tradition. So to my right here, this is a church called the Church of All Nations, and it was built not by all nations, but many nations contributed money, designed by a Italian architect, Antonio Barlucci, who designed many churches in the Holy Land. And so it's controlled by the Catholics. And so it's a very, very important, beautiful place here. So take a look at that olive tree there. I mean, look at how old that looks, this tree, and pretty amazing. Okay, when we started our tour, we were all the way on the top of the mountain. I don't know if you can see the arches all the way on top, but that's where we started. Now we're all the way at the bottom of the Mount of Olives. Below us, the Kidron Valley. We're looking from the other side now. And so you see a whole nice view. You can see the white patch there. That white patch are all actually, that's the Jewish graveyard. That's just stone after stone after stone after stone. And then you see it turns green, and you see the gold domes of the Russian Church of Mary Magdalene, and below it, if you can see, I hope you can, the colorful facade of the Church of All Nations, or the Church of Gethsemane. And up there with the orange roofs is the Jewish neighborhood of Malei Zaitim. As it tells us in the Bible that King David, it's the very first time the Mount of Olives is mentioned, when King David is running from his son Absalom, or Avshalom in Hebrew, who's trying to dethrone or take over the kingdom. And so King David runs down through the Kidron Valley, up the Mount of Olives, and just beyond it on the other side is the Judean Desert. So that orange roof community is a Jewish community called Malei Zaitim, which is the name used in the Tanakh, or in the Hebrew Bible. And so you see this incredible view of the Har Zaitim, the Mount of Olives range. But remember, Jerusalem sits on the edge of the Judean Desert. So again, if you were standing anywhere along the top and looking in that direction, you would be looking out towards the Dead Sea, towards the Judean Desert, and you'd actually be able to see the country of Jordan. So take a look up at the Mount of Olives, where we began. That is where, both in Jewish tradition and Christian tradition, the Messiah will arrive on that mountain, and he will come down that mountain, and he will enter right here where I am standing into what's called the Shar Rachamim, the gates of mercy. Some call it the Eastern Gate, some call it the Golden Gate, some call it the Shushan Gate, but the Messiah will come from the Mount of Olives and enter in here. Now, clearly, Jews and Christians, we have a very different view on who the Messiah is. That's okay, but what we do agree is that we're waiting for the Messiah. And so every day as Jews, we say the phrase, Ani ma'amin, I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Messiah. Even though he may delay, we're waiting for him. And we know that the shofar, the sounding of the shofar, will herald the Messianic era. So what a great way to end our tour, with a blast of the shofar. This has been Rabbi Moshe of the Israel Alliance. We hope you enjoyed the tour. Okay, I hope you really enjoyed our tour today. Please, in the comments below, let us know what other tours you would like to see. And if you enjoyed this tour and you want to show appreciation for our organization, you can click the donate button below. Your money will go to help Holocaust survivors. It will help families that were hurt by this recent war in Gaza, and it will help children at risk. We hope you participate in our campaign, so click the donate button below. Have a wonderful day. I am Rabbi Moshe of the Israel Alliance.